While reinforcing feedback drives growth and change, balancing or negative feedback seeks stability and imposes limits. Whenever you pursue a goal or look to correct or adjust something to a desired state, you're engaging in balancing feedback. Imagine you throw a big party and the next day you have a whole lot of mess to clean up. Guess what? That's balancing feedback. You don't want to live in a mess, so when you clean up, you are bringing the state of your house back to a desired state. In positive feedback, an increase in a variable eventually leads to a further increase in that same variable. In negative feedback, an increase in a variable such as the amount of mess eventually leads to a decrease in that same variable. You clean up your mess to keep it at an acceptable level. Balancing feedback operates whenever there is a goal-oriented behaviour. The goal may be explicit or implicit. If the system's goal is one you like, you'll be happy, but if it's not, you'll find your efforts to change the system are frustrated until you can either change the goal or weaken its influence. A balancing loop always has 4 elements: a corrective action, a performance variable, a target or goal, and a gap between your target and your actual performance. The difference between the performance variable and your goal stimulates corrective action until the gap disappears. The current level of cleanliness of your house is the performance variable, the desired state of cleanliness is the objective, and any cleaning activity that you do is a corrective action that brings the current state towards the target state. There are many examples of balancing feedback in the world around us. When you ride a bicycle, you use it all the time. A sway to the left and you adjust to the right, a sway to the right and you adjust to the left. This is how we keep our balance on a bicycle. It's a cycle of continual adjustment. It's balancing feedback. Whenever you learn something, you are also in a balancing feedback loop. Exams and continual assessment help us compare our current understanding to a learning goal, and then we take corrective action such as reading or revising to reduce the gap. Balancing feedback is also everywhere in business. All goals, budgets, targets, and objectives have a balancing feedback structure. You set a target, and so long as current performance is below it, you undertake corrective action. Strikes and conflicts also have the same structure. People generally strike to oppose some change in working conditions or to protest, resist, or influence some change that has, or they think will, push the current situation away from a desired state. Our body also constantly engages in a wide variety of balancing feedback, such as when it regulates the sugar levels in our blood or our body temperature. For example, when our blood sugar levels are high, your body releases a hormone called insulin that helps glucose bind with muscle and fat tissue cells. So long as the gap between the actual and desired blood sugar levels is positive, the body continues to release insulin. This balancing feedback loop keeps turning until the actual sugar levels return to desired levels, closing the gap between the two to 0. Biologists call these regulatory processes homeostasis. We can find balancing feedback designed into many machines. A thermostat is a very common example. The heat produced by a furnace or the cold air produced by an air conditioning unit depends on the difference between the thermostat setting and the actual temperature. Balancing feedback often combines with reinforcing feedback to create more complex behaviours in the real world. Let's see how this happened with the creepy clown attacks. Given the rise in public concern, French authorities took action. The police made arrests, the courts handed down tough sentences, and some towns even banned the rental of clown costumes. We can group these actions together, call them repressive and preventive actions, and add them to our diagram. The variable most directly affected by these actions would be the number of attacks. The most direct cause would be the level of public concern. We now have 2 loops. Can you see how this second loop uses some variables in the first loop to complete itself? To make our model clearer, let's name the loops. The first is a reinforcing loop of media-driven growth in attacks. The second is a balancing loop that represents the reaction of authorities. We can tell the second loop is a balancing loop by going around the loop and counting the number of negative polarities. If there is an odd number, it's a balancing loop. Otherwise, it's a reinforcing loop. The balancing loop has the effect of a brake on the reinforcing loop. We can see this happening in week 45 when clown attacks begin to drop as loop dominance shifts from the growth-driving reinforcing loop to the goal-seeking balancing loop. These 2 types of feedback are central in all complex behaviours in the world around us.